That's troubling. Look, I mean, that's very troubling because, look, the real turning point for happened 40 years ago with Margaret Thatcher, and that was the real era of the great British comeback. And so all I'm saying is I think Americans, I can't talk for Donald Trump, but just Americans I'm talking to said, well, we'll give this guy a chance. We'll see what he does. Show me, show us what you're going to do. But if they move in a more regulated big government direction, the outcome we know won't be very positive.
Now, it's not just huge domestic challenges that Andy Burnham is going to be facing in his first day in number 10. Of course, there is a long list of geopolitical international challenges as well. President Trump's administration has already warned Andy Burnham that defense spending must take priority over all other spending commitments. The U.S. ambassador telling the Times newspaper that the new prime minister must move beyond rhetoric and make a sustained new level of investment in defense. If Burnham can't set out a path to find 3.5% of GDP on defense spending, he may soon face accusations of failing to defend the security of the country. All this comes after confusion about whether Andy Burnham will start new oil and gas drilling in the North Sea. Donald Trump said that he thought Burnham would go, quote, all the way. He said they'd be singing and dancing on the streets of Aberdeen. That may not strictly be true. Burnham will face many challenges inside number 10, but will building an amicable relationship with President Trump be one of the biggest, the hardest? Well, let's talk now with Steve Moore, former economic advisor to President Trump. Steve Moore, thank you very much for joining us on The Times at 1. What do you think Donald Trump will make of Andy Burnham?
Well, look, we have a special relationship, obviously, with the UK, and we want to maintain that. The United Kingdom is one of our most important allies, maybe next to Canada, which is right next door to us in the United States. So it's really critical that we have a very positive relationship. I think Mr. Burnham would be wise to take some of Donald Trump's advice, not all of it, but look, we have a pretty strong economy right now, especially compared to Europe. And the big challenge, I think, look, I'm an economist, I'm not a foreign policy person, but, we've always believed that the UK has been kind of pulled and pushed in two directions, whether the European more socialist model or the more free enterprise-based American model. And I think that Donald Trump can sort of show Mr. Burnham how to move in a more prosperous direction.
Well, it's interesting you say that. Donald Trump described Andy Burnham when he first heard about his likely rise to power as, quote, an extremely liberal guy, a mayor of some town. He said he couldn't quite remember which town. But this idea of him being extremely liberal, and today, as he entered number 10 Downing Street, he talked about his desire to exert much greater state control over key utility industries, for example, talked about nationalization. Is that going to worry Donald Trump? Is it going to worry the financial markets in the United States? How are they going to see it?
Well, I think that the financial markets are going to wait and see. We're all very curious to see what Mr. Burnham does, what kind of ideology he brings to the British government. As I said, I think it would be wise for the Brits to move more in a free market direction. You have the taxes are too high, the regulations too high, government is too big.
Well, sorry to interrupt, you may not be aware of this, but Andy Burnham is making a point of saying that he's going to address the failure of 40 years of neoliberalism. So,
well, that's troubling. Look, I mean, that's very troubling because look, the real turning point happened 40 years ago with Margaret Thatcher, and that was the real era of the great British comeback. And so all I'm saying is I think Americans, I can't talk for Donald Trump, but just Americans I'm talking to said, well, we'll give this guy a chance. We'll see what he does. Show me, show us what you're going to do. But if they move in a more regulated big government direction, the outcome we know won't be very positive.
You said, and I take the point that you're an economist, you're not a political and foreign policy advisor, but nonetheless, clearly it matters a great deal to the United States that Britain is seen to be ramping up its defense capability, its defense expenditure, and the idea across NATO is that you get to 3.5% of GDP on military expenditure as soon as possible. Andy Burnham seems not to want to do that before 2035. That was what Keir Starmer left behind him as a project. How is that going to be seen in the United States? I mean, if Burnham doesn't speed up the rebuilding of Britain's defences, do you think that will have a really damaging impact on relations with the Trump White House?
Look, in May, Americans are frustrated, including myself, but I would say most Americans are frustrated with the fact that the Europeans have not lived up to some of their NATO promises. And one of those is to maintain a certain level of defense, because the United States has protected Europe over the last 50 or more years. And so we would like to see, I'm not just talking about Britain now, I'm talking about Europe as well. We do want to see them pay their fair share for the mutual defense of the Western Hemisphere.
And then there's the vexed issue of drilling for oil and gas in the North Sea, which is a particular preoccupation of Donald Trump. I mean, there's this bizarre thing where he said, you know, he thinks Burnham will go all the way, and the people of Aberdeen, Scotland, are dancing in the streets because the new PM has stated he will be opening up the invaluable North Sea oil. Well, you know, the truth is he hasn't really said that at all. And there are 2 oil fields which already have notional licenses, which currently are being investigated in the courts. It's pretty complicated, but he's certainly not talking about new fields and new licenses. Trump's going to be disappointed. Again, I'm just trying to measure how much this matters to the Trump White House. If Burnham is a disappointment, quote unquote, on drilling for oil and gas, how big a deal is that going to be seen as?
Well, I think in this case, it's just advice that he's giving to Britain, which is, look, we in the United States have made a policy shift towards using all the energy we have, our oil, our gas, our coal, our nuclear power, so we can be the energy dominant country in the world.
Yeah, and if I may say so, ignoring climate change.
Yeah, so we don't think that building windmills is the solution to climate change. And the governments can't do very much. The one thing governments surely can't do is change the temperature of the planet. But the point is that I think he's just saying, look, if you want to get richer in Britain, you have a great asset there in the North Sea. Well, I can't tell you how much oil is left. I know it's been drilled for 40 years now, but we're doing a lot of drilling in the United States. We're getting rich off of it, and it's making us less dependent. I think the whole point, this isn't just a economic point, it's a foreign policy and security point. The less reliant countries like Britain and the United States are on the Middle East, the better we all are, as we've discovered by the conflict in Iran.
All right, well, we're out of time. But Steve Moore, former economic advisor to President Trump, thank you very much indeed for joining me on The Times at 1.